Have you ever wanted to create your own cartoon, but always worried about how much work would be required to sort of draw each frame and plan each mouth movement and match it up to somebody's voice? Well, luckily Adobe Character Animator is available and it is possibly the tool for you. So in this series of videos we'll be looking at Adobe Character Animator from beginning to end. We'll be looking at its interface, we'll be looking at how to prepare a puppet essentially. That's how Adobe refer to these characters, and then how we can create triggers, custom actions and the final use case deployment. So in this video we're just going to go through a kind of general overview of Character Animator, its sort of interface, the way it's set up and how to sort of get started. So when you, in order to be able to use this, you will obviously need an Adobe CC license. So please bear that in mind. There are free alternatives for those who want to start off, or cheap alternatives for those who want to start off with character animation, such as Crazy Talk and their character animation suite that they often offer. Again, I'll put a link to that in the description down below. But we're just going to be focusing on the Adobe CC suite and Character Animator in particular in this series. So when you first launch Character Animator, you'll notice this window will appear. You also will obviously need access to a webcam and a microphone. So what I'm going to do for the purposes of just highlighting the interface today is I'm just going to use one of their prefab characters. So I'm just going to select one of their puppets and we will go with, what character shall we go with? We'll go with a unicorn, I think. We'll try this one out for size. So the way that Character Animator operates is we have to create puppets. Now we'll go through this in more detail when we start looking at preparing our own puppet and sort of designing one from scratch. But the basic principles are that we have to create a character in layers, and then those layers are tracked using our webcam. So as I move my eyes around, the eyes on the character on the screen should move. As I talk, the mouth movements will change shape, doing the E-R-O-R kind of gestures. So there are certain images associated to each mouth movement. And basically what Character Animator does is analyze the audio frequencies to then match that frequency up to that motion. So when you first open a puppet or create a scene like this, you'll be greeted with this interface. So over here at this sort of corner we have our project window. So we have our scene. This scene is what we can see on the scene at the moment. So this is essentially our recording screen. This is our movie that we're making or stream that we're working with. We also have this other file or project which is got indicated by this little person icon. Looks a little bit like a porn piece, but this is our puppet. So again, I'll go for that in a second in a bit more detail, but that puppet basically contains all of our information, our layers and our kind of controls and rigging for our animated character. I'm just going to reset my pose. So by default, as you can see, my character's sort of leaning to one side. That's because it's not actually stabilized to my webcam. So over here we have this camera and microphone panel. You can see every time I talk, this little microphone goes up and down to indicate that it's recording and capturing my voice. And we also have this little icon here which is for our webcam. I'm just going to set the reset pose. There we go. So it's now a bit more accurate. So once I click my rest pose, you can see I've got these little dots around my face. These dots indicate a kind of markers that it's looking for. So the kind of structure of our eyes, the structure of our mouth, and our general head shape. So it can track us in a kind of motion. It can do a very limited forwards and backwards sort of tracking, but it is largely used for 2D animation. Character Animator is. We can also at any point over in our project window with our puppet selector, we can also open this up in Photoshop. So you will also need access to either Photoshop or Illustrator to create your assets and modify our design. The next window I'm just going to show to you is this one here called triggers. So what these triggers basically do are we'll look again at these in a dedicated video, but these are keyboard shortcuts that when we press a key on our keyboard we can activate an animation. So we could, for example, let's say I want to change it to be let's say upward. I can press Q, and now you'll notice that when I press Q, her head moves slightly up. Although I can control that with my own motion, it's something that we could also keyframe using the triggers action. Again, we'll go for that in more detail when we do a dedicated video on triggers. Down here at the bottom is our timeline. So if anybody's ever used anything like Premiere Pro, After Effects, Sony Vegas, any video editing program, this should become quite clear to you what this is. But basically this is our timeline, and our timeline we can set keyframes. So we could say at maybe like 10 seconds we want this hand here to be up in the air, and maybe this hand then to sort of with its belly kind of motion. So the way we work with Couch Animator is we move our timeline to where we want the recording to start. I hit the small little record button, which is indicated by this little red dot here. It counts down for me. It starts the recording. As you can see, the timeline's now scrubbing. So if I start moving anything around in my scene, start moving my head, I talk, I blink, I move my eyes around, etc, etc, and then I press stop. It will capture all that data that I've just fed it, so all that live information, and it will create this little keyframes for us. So this is basically all my dragging. So when I was clicking on the hands and dragging them, it's recorded those points, and it's also recorded my audio as a wavelength here, and then obviously that is linked already to my mouth shapes within my Photoshop file. And again, we'll go over that more in the prepping details. So as you kind of already saw, with this model I can click and drag. So again, we'll look at how we can create draggable points and start building a whole body. To begin with, we will start off with just the head, and then we'll move further on as the series progresses. Up here in this window here, we also have a few little icons I just want to quickly highlight. So we have our forwards, backwards, so we can return to start our timeline, stop, record, etc, which I've just gone through quickly. We can also adjust our playback and recording speed. I'm going to keep this at 1:1, but again, you could change, this is essentially how many frames per second it's kind of calculating and capturing. We have our refresh, so we can refresh the scene, reload it from scratch essentially. We have our mesh, so this shows you how our model is created. Each of these little wireframe points essentially denote a kind of correlation to each other. So when I drag something, it deforms and starts to move this mesh around. This little button here is for our stream. So if we wanted to connect this to something like OBS for Twitch streaming, or via projection, so we could actually project and map this out onto a screen or onto an object, we could click this here, and it uses siphon. So with anything that can take a siphon input, we can extract this to that player. We can also adjust the scale. This little button here is our background colour. So by default, for example, it's white at the moment. If I click it once, it gives us a transparent. Actually, when we stream through this, it will always be transparent unless we've already created a background that's static. So just bear that in mind. But I can also change it to a few different colours like so. It's more to kind of give us an idea of, so we can see everything in relation to each other. I'm just going to change this to be transparent just to make things a bit easier for myself, because white on white is quite hard to see. So that is the essential record stream screen. As I click on anything in my scene, so if I click on the puppet for example, you'll notice here in our properties panel the information changes here, and again we'll go over this in a lot more detail when we kind of cover the rigging stage, but just to kind of give you a clue, there's some replays here, so I could click kind of these actions here, and if I click and hold, it'll actually play that recorded animation for us. So again, these can be assigned to triggers or shortcuts on our controller or MIDI device. So again, like just a quick, speaking of MIDI, you can actually connect it to a MIDI device, so we could use a MIDI interface, such like a touchpad or trackpad interface. So when we tap different buttons on something like a Stream Deck or something, we could correlate those to perform actions for us. So again, you don't have to use a keyboard and mouse, and it's quite really useful for kind of live stuff, although you can obviously use pre-recorded stuff with this. So I'm just going to take us to our rig. So to get to our rig, we can either double click on our puppet or click the rig button at the top. And what this gives us is essentially, this is our static character. So this is all of our layers. So if we quickly just have a nosy over here, this is our Stardust puppet character. And if we drop down here, we can see we've got this little crown. This crown denotes that it's the controller. Everything within that group is a key factor. So it's looking for that information all the time. We can drop down our head, for example. So here we can see we have different heads on show. So at the moment its default is showing the frontal position. If I turn that off by clicking on the little eye icon, and let's say open up the left quarter, you can see that every single frame within our model is, or every single big gesture or big motion is its separate layer, essentially. So each of these images here are a separate layer within our Photoshop file that has been created and manipulated. So there is quite a bit of legwork you have to do with this initially, but in comparison to having to draw each frame individually, traditional method, it's actually a bit quicker, especially for mouse movements. So you don't have to match mouth movements as much, the software does that for you. We can see here we have these little hand icons. This denotes that these are triggers, so you can hover over them and you can see they've got keyboard shortcuts. These are correlating to our motions down here. We have this little icon here for behaviors. So this behaviors means it basically is either a fixed point, a draggable, or a motion line. So again, by selecting that layer, we can see over here in our properties panel, it gives us a variety of options. Again, we'll go through this in more detail when we get to the prepping a puppet and trigger videos. But just to kind of give you a clue, each of these here assign to a different kind of general action. So if I just go to the left eye for a second and select that, you'll notice that with the left eye layer selected, we have on our tags, it's correlated to our left eye tag. So the way that Character Animator works is everything is assigned to a tag or position. So it's very good for humanoid shapes. It's a little bit more problematic if you're wanting to do something more animal shape. So when you've got something that's more quadruped, you will have to sort of do a bit more manual animation for the limbs. And likewise, Character Animator can't actually track your hands. So if I just quickly go back to the chord stream, just to show you what I mean. It can't track my hands, so you notice when I'm moving my hands around, the character's hands aren't moving. To move the hands, I have to physically move them and keyframe them like so. So that's something to bear in mind. It only can really at the moment track the face. Just go back to the rig. And we also have these little icons here, which again can indicate whether it appears or not, depending on an action or keyboard shortcut being pressed. And again, we'll go through this in a lot more detail in a dedicated video. Last window I'm going to show you is our stream. So this stream is essentially a kind of live feed view. So I can press buttons down here in my controls, which so let's say I press 8, I can get it to celebrate, and whilst I'm talking and moving around, it's still capturing that information. So this is a more user-friendly kind of method of seeing how these triggers are established. And we can, again, like I said, output this to Twitch, OBS, any software that can take a siphon input, and we can have a live feed in a stream that way. And again, control it by shortcuts on a keyboard or MIDI pad. A few little things, again I'm just going to quickly gloss over quickly, there is also a characterizer. So let me just open the characterizer up for us and just create a new capture. So what
Welcome
the
to
characterizer does is
We're going to walk through a short process to capture your facial features.
If I keep my face within
I'll
the
ask
circle,
you to make facial expressions and repeat specific words. Please say each word clearly and expressively. Keep your face centered in the camera preview image. Click Start Capture to begin.
Start Capture.
Look at the camera lens and make a neutral expression in 3, 2, 1. Close your eyes in 3, 2, 1. Open your eyes and smile in 3, 2, 1. Frown in 3, 2, 1. Make a surprised expression in 3, 2, 1. Repeat after me. Adobe.
Adobe.
Photoshop.
Photoshop.
Lightroom.
Lightroom.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! So what that's done is it's basically captured and asked me to perform a series of actions. Using those series of actions, it can start to create our mouth shapes, so our F, O, S, W, W, M, L, etc.
Great job! Your characterizer capture is now being created. The next step is to pick a style to apply to your capture, and then adjust the settings.
Sometimes can take a bit of time, like it is now. There we go. So here it's just extrapolated my face. I then can choose a sort of style. I can preview each of the gestures like so. And let's say I want my face to have the sort of stylistic properties of this dog. I can click that style, and then it'll take my face features and blend it with that style. Likewise, I can do it with a more kind of cartoony look. Or sort of hand-drawn style. And again, the results of this can vary greatly, so it's not exactly perfect. It's basically just blending two styles together. But if I was to generate that puppet, it would then capture each of those frames, and then if I was to open up a new scene, I could then start talking and recording and using it like I would a puppet we made from scratch, for example. So as you see, it's tracking my head motion, tracking my mouth, but it's got this stylized look to it. I can always control the strength of its detection, so I can just, if I wanted my head to sort of track or be detected in certain ways or controlled less. So at the moment it's quite, I have to go quite extreme. But if I wanted my head motions to be a lot more kind of super extreme and more flouncy, I can now get them to move a lot more per my real life movement, so to speak. So the lower I make my strength, the kind of less motion I have to do in real life for it to track. The higher I make my strength, the more I have to basically move in real life to get it to move in correlation to that. So, same as smoothing. So smoothing is how sort of smooth it goes between one motion and the next. And again, we'll cover that more when we actually get into the prepping the puppet and creating our own from scratch, for example. If you have any issues with your setup, you can always go to Preferences, and this is where you can choose your microphone input. In terms of your webcam, it will typically take your inbuilt one, or if like me you're using an external one, you will need to have the software drivers installed for that. And then once we finish our video, we could just press File, Export, and we can export that video via MIDI encoder. We can export it as an image of sequence, a PNG sequence, so we can even take that PNG sequence into another program like Spark or After Effects or something. And that's basically the overall kind of introduction to character animation. So hopefully this series of videos we'll go through everything from start to finish. This has been a very kind of broad overview, kind of introduction to the software. If you have any queries or questions, please remember to always comment down below, and I'll see you again in the next video. Goodbye.